الله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So we've been going through the chapter that deals with forgetfulness in the prayer, and we've talked about various different types of forgetfulness, and today we're coming on to a new section, and that is when you forget fard elements in the prayer. When you forget fard elements in the prayer. We touched on that at the end of the last lesson. We're going to continue to talk a little bit about that now. And then after that we will go into an area which is called the mustankih, the person who is plagued by doubts. We will cover that also in the course of today, inshallah. So, Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani rahimahullah says,
ومن انصرف من الصلاة ثم ذكر أنه بقي عليه منها شيء فليرجع إن كان بقرب ذلك.
Whoever leaves the prayer, insarafa. وَمَنْ insarafa مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ. In other words, how do you leave the prayer? How does a person leave the prayer? By saying Assalamu alaikum. So you say Assalamu alaikum at the end of your prayer, and then you realize, as soon as you said Assalamu alaikum, that you missed something out, that you haven't completed all of the elements of the prayer that you need to complete. You remember this after you have said the salam, because you can either remember what you have left before the salam or after the salam. He talks in a little bit about what happens if you remember before saying Assalamu alaikum. Now he's saying you've remembered after saying Assalamu alaikum. What do you do? He says, فَلْيَرْجِعْ. He should go back to his prayer. He's left the prayer, but then he should re-enter into the state of prayer. How does he do that? He says, فَيُكَبِّرُ. He should say the takbiratul ihram. He should once again say Allahu Akbar, even moving the hands as you do, as is recommended, raising your hands and then moving them down as you say Allahu Akbar. Raf'ul yadayn, as this called. And then he should make up the thing that he has missed.
This is before you say Assalamu alaikum.
After you've said, we're dealing first with after you've said Assalamu alaikum. If you remember before you've said Assalamu alaikum, then if you still go on to say Assalamu alaikum, your prayer is totally invalid. You're not allowed to say Assalamu alaikum if you remember within the prayer that you've missed out some fard element. You have to make it right before saying Assalamu alaikum. But if you remember now, you haven't remembered until you've said Assalamu alaikum, then you think, I just did 3 rak'ats. I should have done 4. Or that last rak'ah I did, I missed out the ruku' from it, or something of that nature. Then, if it is close in time, and we've talked about this thing, what it means by not much time having passed, either by leaving the mosque, which counts as a long time, or what is known by the urf, the general position, the custom of the land, as meaning a long time. Generally speaking, 5 to 10 minutes. Somebody stays seating in the mosque for an hour, that's considered, according to our urf, to be a long time, an hour. But if it's a short period of time, then he can go back and do what he's saying. He goes back, فَيُكَبِّرُ تَكْبِيرَةً يُحْرِمُ بِهَا. He says a takbirah by which he enters into that state of ihram, that state of inviolability, that state of being within the confines of the prayer. ثُمَّ يُصَلِّي, and in some of the versions it says ثُمَّ يُصْلِحُ. Both of them make sense. Then he prays, or he makes right, he puts right مَا بَقِيَ عَلَيْهِ, what he had missed, what remains incumbent, obligatory upon him from that prayer. The rak'at that he hadn't done, the ruku' that he hadn't done, and so on and so forth. If it was a ruku' that he missed, and it was from one of the first 3 rak'ats, or any of the rak'ats now, because once he said Assalamu alaikum, he can no longer go back and make just the ruku'. He has to make it right by praying a new rak'at. The only way after you've said Assalamu alaikum to make any of the previous rak'ats right is to do a full new rak'at.
وإن تباعد ذلك أو خرج من المسجد ابتدأ صلاته.
If تَبَاعَدَ ذَلِكَ. If a long time has passed, and we've talked about this thing of time, or he leaves the mosque, then both of these things mean that he has to start his prayer again. So, your dhuhr, if you did 3 rak'ats for it, then left the mosque, and then remembered outside, what do? You come back, or you continue going home, but you have to make up that dhuhr prayer completely, all of it. You don't have to necessarily pray it in the mosque. Apart from, as we said, if it was a Jumu'a prayer that was lacking.
And what happens, it's different because you're saying the example of being in the mosque. What happens when you're not in the mosque, like if you're at home?
Yeah, same thing.
So then if you leave, where do you have to?
Then you do it on the basis of time.
Oh, I see.
A long time has passed. Or you engage in outside actions extraneous to the prayer. In other words, you leave your zone of prayer behind. So you're in your prayer room, you're concentrating on your prayer, then you get up and you go back to doing whatever work you were doing. And you've left the zone of prayer, that's it. You've got to then go back and do the whole prayer. If you've completely left the zone of prayer behind. So a mosque could be a mosque, or it could be a masjid, the place where you do sajda, even in your own home. ما بقي عليه وإن تباعد ذلك أو خرج من المسجد ابتدأ صلاته
وكذلك من نسي السلام.
وكذلك من نسي السلام. So, you come to the end of your prayer, you've done all of the things of the prayer, then you completely forget to say Assalamu alaikum at the end. And then you get up, and then you're about to leave the mosque and you realize, I haven't done the salam. Then you must come back and sit down again, but with the takbir al-ihram, Allahu Akbar, then sit down, then you do the tashahhud because the salam is preceded by a tashahhud, and then you say Assalamu alaikum. This is if you've left where you're sitting. If you've continued to face the qibla and you haven't moved position, you're still in the same sort of position as you would be when you're praying, you haven't turned, you haven't got up, then if you remember the salam, as he's going to say in a minute, you simply say the Assalamu alaikum and you don't have to do any sajdas. In this case, you do. When you got up and you've walked away and then realized, you have to come back and you have to do the sajdas after the salam because you've added all of those motions that you've talked about then. So it's had addition added to it.
And when you say the salam before you finish the prayer, like still 1 rak'ah left, you say Assalamu alaikum, but then right after that, you remember, you have to do the takbiratul ihram, or you just...
No, you have to say takbiratul ihram to enter back into the state of prayer. Because as we've just mentioned here, this is exactly the same thing. وَمَنْ انْصَرَفَ مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ وَذَكَرَ أَنَّهُ بَقِيَ عَلَيْهِ. If you leave the prayer and you remember that something remains, a rak'at, for example.
For example, the one is praying behind an imam, and he came later. So the imam says Assalamu alaikum, and he says Assalamu alaikum, but then he remember that he has to do more rakats.
Yes.
He has to say takbiratul ihram.
Yes, he has to say takbiratul ihram to enter back into it, because he has said the salam to exit from the state of prayer. So his intention with the salam is to exit from that state of ihram. So he has to enter back into a state of ihram in order to continue his prayer and make up what's left.
ومن لم يدر ما صلى أثلاث ركعات أو أربعا بنى على اليقين.
Before we go on to this, there's a thing about making, if you are unsure whether you've missed something out or not. Often the imam sometimes will complete his prayer and think he's done it completely, but somebody behind him will say, Imam, you've missed out something from your prayer. And then he'll tell the imam that he's missed out something. And the imam will be unaware of this. When should the imam accept the word of that person behind him, and when should he not? This is a big issue. The position of the people of Imam Malik is that if two people who are trustworthy and who are practicing Muslims whose word is known to be true, tell the imam, two, then the imam should follow them, unless he himself is sure that he did everything. If almost everybody behind him says, you only did 3, even if the imam is almost 100% sure himself that he did 4, he has to follow the word of the people behind him. But if it's only 2 or 3 or a small number, then if he is completely confident in himself that he did it completely, he can ignore what they tell him. If one person tells him, then the Imam ignores that person, unless he himself entertains similar doubts. So one person is not enough for the Imam to have to stand up and do another prayer and everybody to follow him. It must be more than one person.
And once he acknowledges that he's made a mistake, he has to do.
He gets up and completes whatever he missed.
But just him alone.
But what
Everybody.
if?
Okay.
Everybody.
What if you?
But they follow him. They continue to follow him.
What if the Imam says Assalamu alaikum and then he goes and he's doing and he ends the prayer and he's sitting and then before the salawat and he says and he reassures was that 3, like he didn't trust himself, and then somebody else also said, yeah, I think that was, and they were both thinking about it, and then what does he have to do?
As I said, if he has doubts himself,
Yeah.
then he is one of these people who has doubts that we've talked about in the beginning, then he gets up. But if he is sure himself, has no doubts, and then somebody else tells him,
Yeah.
then when does he follow the word of somebody else? You see, there's difference here. The Imam has doubts, then he gets up and prays. Because he is a person who has doubts, and unless he is what we're going to call mustankih shortly, the Imam falls under the ruling of somebody who, when he has doubts, has to build on what he is certain of. But if he is certain, I did 4, and then somebody else tells him, no, you did 3.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a joke story they tell of that, is that an Imam prayed, and he said Assalamu alaikum, and he was confident that he'd done 4. And nobody behind him said anything apart from one man. One man said to him, Imam, you only did 3 rak'ats. And he said, no, I'm pretty sure I did 4. How can you be so sure that I only did 3? And the man said, well, I have 4 shops. In each rak'at, I do the accounts for 1 shop. I have 1 shop left. So there's a joke they tell that was relating to this sort of thing. But in that particular case, the Imam doesn't follow the position of one person.
لم يدري ما صلى 3 ركعات أو 4 بنى على اليقين وصلى ما شك فيه.
So if you pray, and this first one we're talking about somebody who says Assalamu alaikum, and then suddenly he remembers that he missed something. He knows that he missed something. We're now talking about somebody who is unsure. There's a difference. The first person we've just been talking about, after he says Assalamu alaikum, remembers, I missed that. So he knows. Now we're talking about somebody who prays, and then once he's come to the end of the prayer, he says, did I do 3 or 4? He can't be confident of either. What does such a person do? He's not sure whether it's 3 or whether it's 4. He says here, bana al-yaqeen. He builds upon that which he is certain of. He is certain that he did a minimum of 3, but he's unsure about the 4th. So he acts as if he's only prayed 3 and stands up and prays a 4th. Or maybe even it's a 5th, he doesn't know. But he builds upon what he is certain of, which is that he has done 3. And then he prays an extra one. And that is the one that he had doubt about, the 4th one, whether he did the 4th one or not.
وأتى برابعة وسجد بعد سلامه.
And وَأَتَى بِرَابِعَةٍ. He does a 4th. In other words, what he is assuming is going to be his 4th, but it may well be his 5th. But because he is unsure, he makes it his 4th. And then, because there is a strong likelihood that he has added something to that prayer, because there is a rak'at that could have been or might not have been, he does rak'ats after the salam. There's nothing that's been taken away from this prayer, no deficiency. There's just something that might have been added to it. So he does his sajdas after the salam. Do you remember the general rule about sajdas? When you add after, when you take something from your prayer or forget something, before, when you do both, before.
ومن تكلم ساهيا سجد بعد السلام.
وَمَنْ تَكَلَّمَ. We talked about this last time. If you speak in your prayer, if you say something to somebody, for example, somebody says Assalamu alaikum, and you say Wa alaikum assalam, for example, while you're praying, without realizing what you're saying. You just automatic pilot say it. What do? Is your prayer invalidated as a result?
Not if it's an excessive, not if it's...
Not unless it's an excessive amount of speech, yes. So a small thing such as that does not invalidate your prayer, but it does mean that you have added something within your prayer, so you should do your sajdas after the salam. If you deliberately speak, knowing you are in the prayer, and you deliberately speak, even if it is obligatory for you to speak. For example, you see a blind man walking along and about to walk in front of a car. He's about to get hit by a car. It is obligatory on you to shout out to warn him. But you are praying, so what do? You still have to speak. You still have to shout out. But your prayer is invalidated by that, and you have to start again. Because you have deliberately spoken in the prayer, even when it's obligatory. Unless you are correcting the imam. If you are behind the imam, and you need to speak to correct the imam, then you can speak so long as you do not speak excessively. You do not have to go into a whole thesis about what he's done wrong, but simply use minimum words possible in order for him to understand what it is that he has missed, or what it is that he has added, or whatever he has done.
And this is for like random sounds as well, right?
We're talking about speech.
Yeah, but if someone makes a random sound with their mouth that they're not supposed to be making in the prayer.
Well, there are things that are like when you are deliberately sighing, and all of those sorts of things which invalidate your prayer. Deliberately laughing, which invalidate your prayer, and those sorts of things.
And if someone
As for those sorts of sounds that people make with their mouth, they're generally without even realizing it, and they're not at the same level as speech. That if a sound like that emerges from you, you have to do sajdas.
But if you do the sound deliberately and it's not part of what you're reciting, then
if it's a sound that's a form of speech in the sense that people could understand it from it.
yeah.
Something rather than just an ordinary body sound that just happens to come from bodies, then that's considered to be classified as speech. If you're deliberately making extraneous sounds that have nothing to do with the prayer.
ومن لم يدري أسلم أو لم يسلم ولا سجود عليه.
Okay, this is what I was talking about before. If you are praying, you come to the end, and then you find yourself, for example, suddenly you're doing the dhikr at the end of the prayer, and you think, oh, did I actually do the salam or not? So you come to the end of your prayer, and then you're continuing with the stuff immediately after the prayer. You're still sitting facing the qibla. You haven't moved from your position, and then you suddenly think, did I do the salam or not? Then all you do is you say assalamu alaikum where you are, and then continue with your dhikr, and you don't have to do any sajda because you haven't moved from your position. It's almost just like you've delayed your salam, because you're allowed when you're doing the tashahhud, for example, to make du'as and say other dhikrs while you're doing the tashahhud. So it's not like you've added extra things that are impermissible within the prayer.
And what if you behind the imam and you say your salam before the imam?
There is a difference of opinion about this, but as I said, generally speaking, the strongest position is that if you say the salam before the imam, your prayer is invalid. But there are some who say you can simply say assalamu alaikum again after the imam in order to make it right. And they say that on the basis that the as-salam is simply one of the names of Allah. So all you've done is say one of the names of Allah. So there are those who say that, but the position that is, you will feel most confident about in terms of whether your own prayer is accepted with Allah is to repeat it if you do the salam before the imam.
ومن استنكحه الشك في السهو فليلهى عنه ولا إصلاح عليه.
Okay, this is what we're talking about, istinkah, which is somebody who is plagued by doubts. So we will leave it there today, inshallah, but just mention to you what this means is somebody who, on an extremely regular basis, has these sorts of doubts in the prayer. And by extremely regular, we mean either every prayer or once a day in the prayer, or even this applies to the prayer or to even wudu. When you're doing wudu, you say, did I do my face? Or when you're praying, did I do wudu? Or when you're within the prayer, did I do 3 rakats or 4 rakats? These are all forms of istinkah. And this is something that is the whisperings of shaitan in order to distract you every time you're praying. People who have this condition regularly, they take it on the basis that shaitan is whispering to them and then they ignore it on that basis. We'll go into it more because there's different types of istinkah. There are those who are certain that afterwards they're certain that they've missed something, and there are those who have doubts while they're doing it. So we'll talk about that next time, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين